Okay, so we're talking about the beginnings of the People's Court. Were you ever on television before People's Court?
No, I don't think so. Except for when I was presiding judge of the Superior Court. Some case would come up, or they wanted to comment about the court. A news person would interview me, but I don't remember doing anything specific.
And I read somewhere that your father had done divorce court. Is that true?
My father was one of the lawyers. They used to have real lawyers do divorce court. And the person that wasn't real was the judge, was an attorney, who was an actor. And Rusty Burrell, the bailiff on People's Court, was the bailiff on that divorce court. And that's one of the things I told Stu Billett. He asked me who I'd recommend for bailiff, and I recommended Rusty. He asked Rusty who he'd recommend as the judge, and he recommended me. So it was a mutual admiration society. But he was the bailiff on that divorce court, and Rusty knew the lawyers who would come into Department 8 at the time, where all the domestic relations cases came. And he liked my father. So he would call him and ask him if he would be one of the lawyers representing one of the parties. And that's how that happened.
Now, when you started to appear on the People's Court, did you consult with the Bar Association to get their opinion on?
Yeah, I consulted with the chairman of the Ethics Committee of the State Bar and the vice president of the State Bar, a man named Stu Cattison, who I'm hoping is still practicing law. I consulted with both of them, asked them if there would be anything unethical about doing this, and they both assured me it was fine.
And cameras had been allowed in the courtroom already, in real courtrooms at this point.
They'd been allowed, but only with the acquiescence of all the parties.
And how did the People's Court actually work? You were a retired judge, so what was how did it work?
Well, both parties signed an agreement that they would be bound by my decision. That's how it happened. It was an arbitration, not a trial, because they were stuck. Once they signed off, they were stuck.
But it was filmed as if it was a courtroom that you did that.
Oh yeah, yes.
Would normally in an arbitration case, would you normally do the swearing in and all of that?
Yes.
You would?
Yes.
Let's see, where was I? How was the show described to you when you were initially going to do it?
It was described to me as a small claims court case. What happened was they had people they called researchers. The researchers would go to the various courts throughout the county, and if they'd read the case and they decide, this sounds interesting to me, they would call both sides, and if both sides agreed, they'd come in and be interviewed by a producer. And the producer would then book the case, and I'd try it. And we did 10 cases in one day. And so that was the week's work. Wednesdays, we shot the show.
Did you see anything beforehand what the cases were going to be, or did you find out on that Wednesday?
No, I knew in advance what it would be because I did some research on my own, and I had someone on the show do research as to what the law was so that I'd be sure I knew what the law was before we started. But sometimes you get fooled. They would tell the producer one thing and testify differently.
Did you have any say in the cases that they chose?
No.
So you didn't reject any? Or
I didn't reject
that?
any. It was there. This is a case for you to try. I tried it, which is reality.
Why do you think people wanted to be on the show?
Well, number one, they were sure of getting some money, because oftentimes you get a judgment in small claims court and you can't ever collect. That's one thing. Secondly, we have a lot of people in Los Angeles who are from New York and Philadelphia and New Jersey and Chicago, wherever, and they can tell their friends back home, I'm going to be on television. It's a great thing. Could be on television.
Did you ever hear anybody later on upset that they had been exposed on TV regarding what happened on the case?
Well, there were a couple of people. One man was a lawyer whose wife had testified one way and she didn't win the case. And he threatened to sue and so forth, but nothing ever came of those cases.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit about some of the cases themselves. Certain categories. I know that feuding neighbors was sort of one of the big sort of categories of cases. What are some of the memorable cases for you with neighbors who feuded with each other?
Well, I remember one case where a woman was suing because her neighbor had encroached on her property with some trees and something, and she's suing him for this encroachment. The encroachment was 3/4 of an inch. In the law, they call it, it's a Latin phrase for it, de minimis. De minimis non curat lex. It means it's the thing is so small that there's no law for it. And so she was very, very upset. I remember, well, you remember the interviews with Doug Llewellyn at the end of the show. I always felt that 50% of the people who appeared before me were very upset. 50% win, 50% lose.
Did you ever watch the interviews afterward on tape or
Yes.
the show?
Yes, I did because I wanted to be sure that Doug was asking the right questions, and that he had a habit early on, which I think he finally cured, by talking about guilt. And these are civil cases. You only talk about guilt in criminal cases. And I used to I say, Doug, you don't talk about guilt. And he finally got it, but it took him a while.
Did you offer suggestions to him, kinds of questions he should be asking?
Occasionally I did, and Harvey Levin did most of it.
And who was Harvey Levin?
He was a former professor of law at Whittier College, and he was the legal advisor. He would do the research on cases in advance so that I would be sure if the law was correct.
And he often appears on TV.
Oh, yes, yes, with his little box that he stands on, because he's short, and he doesn't like to be seen as short, so he stands on a box. We used to tease him about that all the time.
I should also ask you...
And he loved to be on television and make the comments. He loved that. And so every opportunity he could get to talk about the law and this particular case, he took it. And I think he was paid a little extra for doing that.
Where did Doug Llewellyn come from?
I don't know. I have the slightest notion. Mm-hmm. I know that the pilot was done with a woman who was a reporter. And they didn't like her for some reason. I think the reason was she was putting her arms around the litigants during the interview. And rather than just telling her, don't do that, they found Doug Llewellyn. Where they found him, I have no idea. I didn't mix into that any more than I wanted them to mix in with my decisions.
What was your reaction to seeing the show with the dramatic music and the graphics and all of that? What did you think of that?
That part didn't bother me. It bothered some people. It didn't bother me because it had nothing to do with the way I decided the case or with the facts of the case or with the law, which was my primary concern was education. The fact that it was entertainment, the fact that we were getting paid to do a job was one thing, but it was very important for me that the law be correct, that people learned from it.
And did you think people learned from it?
Oh, I had many, many people who would write to me and tell me what they've learned. And many people would tell me they wanted to go to law school now because, boy, after watching me on the People's Court. So I love that. I'll tell you something very interesting. When I left the bench after my 20 years, I tried to get on radio and television with a program to teach law, and I was turned down by everyone. So when the People's Court came along and I had an opportunity to really teach people about law. It was very important to me.
So when you gave your decision at the end, would you do it a little bit differently than you would have if it was not on television?
No, except in small claims court, real small claims court, you don't give your decision from the bench, because first, you're not dealing with lawyers. No one else is going to know about it except the litigants. So you're told when you first get on the bench, send a postcard, because if you tell the people who are in front of you, they're going to get angry, you might get into a fight. But if you send them a postcard, then it's okay. But obviously, I wanted to teach and tell why I was deciding a case the way I did. And that's why on television, I would give my reasons.
Did you also try to mend the relationship between the like feuding neighbors and people like that who knew each other?
Well, the most famous case from my standpoint was the one I had a 17-year-old girl who was suing her grandmother for taking back a hope chest that she had been given for Christmas. And the parties were not getting along. And I could tell and see what was happening. The grandmother was with her new boyfriend or gentleman friend, and the girl was represented by her boyfriend, who was in court as her guardian ad litem for the purpose of the trial. And I said, I'd like to see you in chambers to see whether or not we can settle this case. It was unheard of for television, because here I'm going to go into chambers. It's not going to be televised. But it was more important for me to have these people get back together as grandmother and granddaughter. So we went into chambers. Rusty, I had him come in with me. I wanted to be protected as a witness. The gentleman friend of the grandmother said to me, "It won't do any good, Judge." And I said, "I didn't ask you, sir." So we went into chambers. About a half hour went by. They talked. They both started to cry. Grandmother said, "You can have your hope chest back." Years later, I got a card from the girl telling me what a wonderful thing that I had done, that their relationship had grown and was better, and she was very grateful that I did what I did. Now, I got back on the bench, explained to the television audience what we had done, the fact the case was settled. I asked each party, "Is this what you want to do?" Yes. And it was all gone. First time I think that it's ever been done on television.
So you had to separate them from those other two.
Yeah.
Gary,
Certainly.
I gotta check your wife.
Okay, we were talking about making decisions on cases. How long did you have to make your decision?
As long as I needed. See, the break on television might have been 2 minutes for a commercial, but they weren't shooting while I was in chambers deciding the case. So I could take as long as I wanted, and I did.
So the day could go shorter or longer?
Depending on how I decided the cases.
And did they have any kind of rule of thumb? Sometimes you decided the case, you didn't take a break. They would just keep shooting.
They just kept shooting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I decided the case from the bench. Is that what you mean?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it was so obvious. I didn't have to go back and think about it. I just decided it right there and then.
Can you talk a little bit about awarding money? Some cases, people seem to be suing for very small amounts of money.
That depends upon the individual. The smallest amount anyone ever sued for, I think, was 75 cents. Very memorable case because of the amount. fellow goes in on his lunch hour, a county employee, and he goes in to buy a beer to have with his lunch. The beer costs 75 cents. He comes back shortly thereafter and he says the beer was flat. He wants his 75 cents back or another can of beer. And the owner says, "Where's your receipt?" I don't have a receipt for 75-cent beer, and I don't think of keeping it. So he sues for 75 cents. The guy was stubborn, he wasn't going to pay. And I believed the man that the beer was flat and he should have had his 75 cents. So that was the smallest judgment I ever rendered. Now, it's easy if you're suing for breach of contract to figure out the amount because it's in the contract, what the loss was. What becomes difficult is a personal injury case. If you lose an arm or you lose an eye, that's one thing. If you just get a couple of scratches or you're rear-ended and you really didn't see a doctor, or if you saw a doctor, you only made 2 trips, or instead of an orthopedic doctor, you went to a chiropractor who might not know as much as an orthopedist. These are things you take into consideration. Did the person have another accident on top of this, or was it only one? You lost time from work. How much were you paid? Maybe you weren't paid. You were paid during that time. So the various factors you take into consideration.
Did you sometimes wish that you could have given more than the $1,500 that was the law?
Yes. Yeah. But the amount now, the top amount is $5,000. When I first started the small claims court, it was $50.
Gosh.
Then it's really small claims.
Let's see, other types of cases were cases with owners' pets that kept coming up. What were some of those memorable cases for you?
You know, I did another show
Yeah.
called Animal Court. I'm trying to think about animal cases that I tried. You know, none of them were so outstanding that I could tell you about them right now.
Mm-hmm. Do people kind of get emotional when it comes to their
Well, they get
pets?
very emotional when it comes to pets. Birds, dogs, cats. People become very attached. On the Superior Court, you get into a divorce case, and there are dogs involved, or cats, various pets. As to who gets those pets is a big thing. Big thing.
What about services, bad services? Any cases there?
Bad services, bad workmanship, malpractice. Malpractice you don't get too much of in small claims because in order to prove malpractice, you have to have an expert witness. And the fact that calling an expert witness and paying for an expert is very, very difficult.
Yeah. There was the case that's always brought up of the stripper that didn't perform well enough. Is that one that you remember or is brought up to you?
Well, I think so. It really wasn't much of a thing. It just they came in and showed that the stripper was sitting on the plaintiff's lap, and obviously the plaintiff loved it. So the fact that the stripper did, I don't know what they expected, but they got what they bargained for.
There was another one with a guy dressed up like a Smurf and scared the children.
Yeah.
Is that one that?
The children really, it didn't make any sense to me because it didn't seem to me that what he did was scarable, if there's such a word.
So you actually found for him?
I think I did. I don't remember it that well. Some cases stand out because of what they do, and others, I tried almost 3,000 cases.
Can you talk a little bit about the typical work week? You said you you shot the whole thing on a Wednesday.
Yes.
But when did you start the week?
I started the week probably on Monday or Tuesday when I got the cases,
And you would get
so that I could look them over and be sure that the law was covered.
so they would send them to your home. You would do it out of a home office.
Yes.
What were the kinds of references that you would use to prepare yourself for these cases? Did you have things on hand, in other words, when you were making your decisions?
Well, I would know what the case was about, and I would call Harvey Levin and say, I want the law on so-and-so and such, and he'd get it for me.
Did you also find yourself having to do your own research, at a moment's
Occasionally.
notice?
I mean, I have a set of law books now here, and which I can use if I need to do any research, and I had those at home.
Let's see what I want to ask. I want to ask more about the actual shooting of the show. Did you deal with the series directors? Did they speak to you, or you did the show and they were sort of behind the scenes calling the shots and doing their work?
They were behind the scenes calling the shots. I had nothing to do with it. I was just concentrating on trying the case.
And where were the cameras located?
They were behind some black mesh. Couldn't be seen in the courtroom.
Did anyone have stage fright that appeared on the show? Or just because they couldn't see the cameras, it didn't seem to affect people?
I don't think it affected them.
And when you had to step down off the bench to look at things, would they actually have a camera following you? Would that be the one case where you could see a camera?
Yes. The camera was off to the side. The litigants didn't really see them.
And what about any kind of spontaneous things that would happen in court? Anything that comes to mind? Excuse me.
Spontaneous? Nothing comes to mind at the moment.
And no,
If it does,
I
I'll.
need a glass of water.
You want to hold it?
Yeah, let's stop for a second.
You didn't get up, did you?
I don't think I stood up.
No.
It's fine.
No.
Yeah, it's fine.
All right. Go ahead.
Okay, we're talking about spontaneous moments on the show.
Yeah, there was a man who was suing because his grandfather clock wasn't fixed properly by the defendant. And I said to Rusty, you want to bring me the clock? I don't know why I wanted to look at it, because I couldn't tell whether he repaired it properly by just looking at it, but something in me just said, I'd like to look at the clock. So Rusty picked up the clock, started to bring it up to me, and it dropped it. And the man who was suing was deaf. I didn't realize it at the time, but he screamed loud. I said, well, it was trying to break the tension. I said, well, it was a cheap clock though, wasn't it, sir? And he said, no, it's not a cheap clock. Well, at any rate, had nothing to do with the case, but I said, we'll pay you. The producers will pay you for any damage to the clock. So that was something very, very unexpected.
Did Rusty ever have to step in between people who are getting a little too agitated or anything like that?
Not on camera that I recall. He'd go out while they were being interviewed and make sure everything was all right there.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah.
And what about the studio audience, the people who filled in? Were there any loud people, or did you have to caution anyone?
No, never happened.
Do you know where those people came from?
No, I have no idea. That was a detail that eluded me.
You had mentioned earlier about educating the public about cases. Did you notice a progression from the beginning of the show about how people prepared themselves to appear on people's court?
Absolutely. I'd have people tell me, even write to me, telling, or if I'd see them out somewhere, they would say, I had this case, but I watched you before I went to court, and you taught me what to do and what to say, and I won my case. A lot of people told me that. The big item was receipts. To tell people, keep your receipts.
Another thing that kept getting brought up on the People's Court is contracts, oral and written contracts. Do you think that people also started to learn about that?
Absolutely. You know, they said an oral contract isn't worth the paper it's written on. You've got to, it's just a matter of whether you're going to believe someone who orally says, I had a contract to do X, Y, Z. But if you've got it right there, you've got a signature, it's much easier proof.
What are the cases that people bring up to you? Are there ones that constantly come up when people meet you in the streets or meet you in person?
Well, when they meet me, the first thing is, did anyone ever tell you you look like Judge Wapner? And I say yes, or whatever. And are you really Judge Wapner? Yes, I am really Judge Wapner. Would you like to see? And I'd pull out my wallet and show them. It's funny how people react to it.
And what was, in terms of the show being...
Oh, I have to tell you about the thing that happened to my wife. She goes into Saks Fifth Avenue, and she wants to buy something, and she gives her name, and said, "Are you really Judge Wapner's wife?" And they just won't believe it.
So when it first went on the air, how soon did you realize that you were becoming famous from this show?
First year, and the interviews started coming out, and met people. First, Telepictures was the first producer of the show, and they gave a party in Las Vegas after the first year, and I'm out there on the dance floor dancing with my wife, and a woman comes in, pushes my wife aside, and starts dancing with me. Another time, we're in San Francisco at the St. Francis Hotel. Group of people standing around talking, and this woman sees me and again pushes my wife aside and starts talking to me. It was very difficult for her, but it made me realize this is the way people are.
Did you also find the reverse, where some people intimidated to meet you? Intimidated by you?
Oh, intimidated by me?
Yeah.
I've been told that I do intimidate people. I'm judgmental. Well, that's my job.
What kind of persona did you have on the show? What did people assume something else about you that might not be true? Or?
Not that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
No.
And were you surprised by the popularity of the show?
Yes, I was a little surprised at that, but obviously very pleased.
Oh.
1 minute.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's stop at the end of this tape, so look up some more questions. So